Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we're going to take a look at some Shadow of the Weird Wizard impressions by Gnome Stew. We're going to talk about how wizards change some of the stuff that they sell on D&D Beyond and the way that they sell things on D&D Beyond. I'm going to dive into Bob World Builder's results from the WOTC and D&D popularity survey that we've been talking about for the past month or so. We're going to look at Delve, the Kickstarter that Bob World Builder is running. I'm going to talk about releasing 3,000, 4,000, I think even more, 5,000 D&D and RPG related tips to the Creative Commons so that you can use them in about any way that you want. I'm going to dive into Raging Swan's Wilderness Dressings product. We're going to talk about what it means to be a good steward of the hobby today. And I'm going to cover the remainder of the questions from the April 2024 Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. The Lazy RPG Talk Show is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to an awesome Lazy GM community, a whole bunch of tools to help them run their games, the Patreon Q&A, and you get to help me put on shows like this. To the patrons of Sly Flourish, thank you so much for your outstanding support. I am eagerly anticipating the full version of Shadow of the Weird Wizard by Rob Schwab. This has been a long time developed role-playing game by Rob Schwab, who developed Shadow of the Demon Lord, a role-playing game that I really like. The player's guide for it has been released in a PDF. They're still working on the physical version. There is also a GM book that includes monsters and story elements and other like campaign worlds and other guides for running the game that isn't out yet. So I've been kind of waiting until all of it comes out before I dive into it. But over on Gnome Stew, they have an excellent article by Jared Rashner that dives into Shadow of the Weird Wizard, what they found, what's different from Shadow of the Demon Lord, what you can expect from this game. And it looks like it's a really, really good article that dives deep into what Shadow of the Weird Wizard is like. So I liked it very much. I thought this was a really useful look at the game. And if you are interested in Shadow of the Weird Wizard, I would definitely read this article. Even if you know nothing about Shadow of the Weird Wizard, you can do no wrong by reading an article about it and say, does this RPG sound interesting to you? So I'm very eager for this RPG. I kind of want the whole thing in my hands in physical book form before I dive into it. And I'd certainly want to have both the player's guide and the GM guide together. But I'm really excited about it. So please take a look at this article from Gnome Stew on Shadow of the Weird Wizard. A big piece of news that happened this past week. I actually first heard about it from a comment on my own YouTube channel. It was my favorite comment I've ever received on YouTube. It is the best comment. You ever want to send a comment that really grabs me, makes me feel good? Send one like this that says, Mike, you were right. Just start off with that. Yeah, I don't really need the rest of it. That part of it I really like. I always shrug off your warnings about D&D Beyond and owning content on there, but today they did something super scummy. They not only took away the option to buy monsters, magic items, races, etc. individually without any warning, they will also now recharge you for those individual purchases if you decided to buy the rest of the book. At least give people a week or two warning if you're going to do something like this. It's the difference between me buying the remaining parts of the book I owned to now possibly never buying anything on there again. So the result is this comment is half right and half wrong. Wizards did talk about it, so they did it, and then they did describe it, and they said, oh, we have some new marketplace stuff that's going on there. So they talked about, hey, they have new sort of new preview pages of products, longer descriptions, but one big thing that they did is they took away the a la carte purchases. So before, you could go to D&D Beyond and you could buy one subclass or one feat or one spell or one magic item or one monster. So if you really only wanted that thing, you didn't want the rest of the book, you didn't have to spend $20 or $30 on the whole book. You could instead buy it for $2. And one of the features of that was if you spent, let's say you bought 4 monsters out of the Monsters of the Multiverse book, and then decided, wow, I really should have bought all of the rest of it, then you would be discounted by the amount of money you've already paid for the material in that book to be able to buy the rest of the book. So what they say now is if you've purchased a la carte items and would like to buy the digital book, your discounts are available to you at any time by contacting customer service. This is actually, I think, new. What happens when you click on this? Oh, this is pretty terrible. So this is worse than I thought. So it used to be that you would just automatically get the discount. Now, if you go to the direct purchasing, you don't get the discount anymore. But apparently you can go to customer service and say, hey, I own some of these things, and that somehow they will give you a discount. I don't know anybody that's actually gone through this. So I don't know how hard that is to do. Doesn't seem great. But here's the big question. The big question and big statement. The big question is, why did they change this? Why get rid of the a la carte purchases? Like, I had heard people say like, oh, we don't want microtransactions in D&D Beyond. And I was like, well, they already have microtransactions. You can go buy a monster for $2. That's a microtransaction. And do I feel bad about that? Not really. It seemed like, well, that's an opportunity for you to be able to buy part of a book without having to buy the whole book, especially if you're a player and you want just one subclass for that one character that you're building. It kind of makes sense that maybe you only have that. And D&D Beyond is a good way to be able to do that. So why did they get rid of it? Like, I don't know why they removed it. They already had the mechanics in place. They already had like the system in place to be able to do it. They just shut it off. Now, maybe they're shutting it off because there's some complication with the D&D 2024 stuff, and that maintaining that part of it was really hard compared to just having entire books for sale. I don't know, and they didn't really say, but they cut off a basic way that you used to be able to buy material on D&D Beyond that you can't buy anymore. Now, at first they said, oh no, you'll get your discount, but now it looks, and I don't know if they changed this or not, because you can change a web page and it's really hard to do it. But that whole idea that like, oh, you can get your discounts on stuff that you previously purchased, you just have to come to customer service to ask for it. Well, that sucks, right? Like, I don't want to have to go back and forth with customer service in order to get the discounts I had applied. So I don't know exactly what's going on there and why they decided to do that. The statement I will make is that this is another example of why a centralized platform is dangerous for a tabletop role-playing game. I've said it many times before. I will say it again. And this is very much in what Cory Doctorow, who I've been listening to and reading a lot of recently, as you can probably tell from a lot of things I say, that Cory Doctorow refers to as the Darth Vader end-user license agreement. The Darth Vader end-user license agreement is, I have decided to change the deal. Pray I don't change it anymore. And that's pretty much what they're doing here, right? That they've decided to change the deal and pray they don't change it anymore. What else could they change? Well, they could start pulling off books that you already own if they wanted to. They could do whatever they want. And if you look at the EULA, they can really do whatever they want. So you go into the EULA, you don't own anything that you paid for. They don't owe you a refund if they decide to take it down. You are limited very severely in what you're allowed to do with the material. They, on the other hand, are not limited hardly at all in what they can do with the material. So that is the Darth Vader license agreement that you kind of agree to when you're working with any of the services. Now, why am I picking on D&D Beyond? It's the biggest. It's unlike any other sort of digital platform like Roll20 or the other ones. They are both the primary producer of the material on it and way above their quote unquote competition. They're 100 times, I'm making a number up, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's far off, 50 to 100 times bigger than the next biggest competitor in their space. They are trying to bring in third parties onto their platform so that you will come to D&D Beyond first in order to buy products even from other people who are then sitting side by side with the people who are their own competitors, right? Like Toma Beast 1 is a direct competitor to Monsters of the Multiverse, but they're on the same platform, and one company gets like 99% profit margin on Monsters of the Multiverse, while the other one gets an unknown profit margin because they won't tell us, probably because they had to sign an NDA. I wouldn't be surprised if Kobold Press had to sign an NDA to say how much of a cut they actually get. So we don't even know what their cut is. Right? Now, obviously, it's good enough that they did it, and because it's a non-exclusive license, that means they can also sell it on their website. Here you go, though, right? Here's an example where they are changing the deal. Pray they don't change it any further. So that's something to consider when we're looking at D&D Beyond. And the more you get wired into D&D Beyond, that same license agreement is true with things like Roll20 as well. Like Roll20 can change the deal, and pray they don't change it any further. In fact, Roll20 is more like Lando Calrissian, where this deal is getting worse all the time, right? Because Lando Calrissian is the one who has the deal between the Emperor and everybody else. He's trying to save, Bespin, and he also has the Emperor on the other side. Roll20 is dependent upon Wizards of the Coast continuing to release material on their platform, and so they have to do whatever Wizards. So it's just really, the digital side is this really dangerous side, and that's why I think working to own your own material is very useful. Buy PDFs. Buy PDFs directly from the publishers who are publishing them. If you cannot download it to a disk and disconnect it from your computer and still have access to it, you don't really own it. Centralized services can change their agreements whenever they want, and it's a danger. And why does it matter for role-playing games more than anybody else? Well, it doesn't, except role-playing games is one of the few areas in hobbies where we do have more control over it than we think we do. Many people think we do. We don't have to depend on digital tools. Are they convenient? Sure. And if you're using them as a convenience, recognizing that the deal can change and you have no say in it, that's cool. But understand that. And here's the example I will give. Like that person who said, you were right, I ignored you all this time, and now they're doing this really scummy deal and I feel really bad about it. that's the case, right? And honestly, my answer is, I told you so, right? Like, I get it. And it's going to be, it's going to get worse. It almost certainly, it's going to get worse. There's no way that it's going to get better, right? Like, you cannot say, oh yeah, no, D&D Beyond will be around forever. No, not. What could D&D Beyond do? Hey, if you're from D&D Beyond, if you're from Wizards of the Coast, you're like, oh God, that Mike Shea guy, I have to listen to that jackass again. What could you do? What can you do, Wizards of the Coast, to make things better? Release the PDFs along with the digital material. When I go and I buy a book on D&D Beyond and I get access to it on D&D Beyond, let me download a PDF of that material as well so I can have a local copy that I know I always have. You do that one step, that one thing. All the other publishers do it. All the people that you're putting, all the other third-party publishers that you're putting on D&D Beyond, they also sell PDFs. It would be really cool. It'd be really cool if you gave access to those PDFs on D&D Beyond. So if I buy Tome of Beast 1 on D&D Beyond, I also get access to the PDF. I don't know if Kobold Press wants that necessarily, but give us the material so we can download it. You want to go even better? Let us download a digital structured version of that data that we could import into other tools. And that would be really awesome too. Something along the lines of what Open5e has, or the way that Foundry data can mix and match and things like that. Give me a way to be able to preserve the data that I buy, regardless of how your platform changes. That's what I want. You want to know what I want? That's what I want. And you can do it because other people are doing it. About a month ago, a little bit more than a month ago, Wizards of the Coast put a poll up. That was what we referred to as the Do You Like Me poll up on Twitter. It was up for like 2 days and then went down again. And people were very confused about what this poll was about. I talked about it on the show, and I said when I found out that they took it down, I was going to I had the idea about recreating the poll, that I was going to run it. And then I was like, why would I bother? It really doesn't matter. How we feel about Wizards of the Coast individually does not matter compared to how everybody else feels about Wizards of the Coast or D&D or anything like that. And I still agree with that assessment. Bob Worldbuilder on the other hand said, I don't know, that sounds like a really cool thing to do. So he went ahead and built a survey that mirrored the Wizards of the Coast survey because he wanted to see the results. He posted it, of course, on his YouTube channel. I posted it over on EN World. I also posted about it here on the talk show. Professor Dungeon Master posted it on his Dungeon Craft YouTube channel. And then they waited for the results. And Bob got about 9,000-ish results from this poll. He did give me early access to look at the poll so that I could do a little bit of analysis. I didn't say anything about it until he was done with his. So Bob has a video on YouTube that you can watch. Here's the video. I will link directly to the video where he talks about his results from the 9,000 players that were surveyed for this survey and gives his results. I wanted to talk briefly about the results that I saw, some of the things that grabbed my attention, some of the things I thought were interesting, and give my primary views. So the one great thing about this poll is if you want to learn more about it, you happen to be a data nerd, you can download the original results from Bob, which has everything as it is. I put together a package of material that includes the original results. I included a version that did some quantification of the qualified answers, that you can do histograms and you can do correlation coefficient reports. I'm going to show one of those. So other ways to kind of chew on the data. I also posted the Jupyter notebook, which I use to do I'm a data analyst. I do data nerd stuff as well. So I put my Jupyter notebook together so you can see like the actual processing that I did. It's in HTML and in Jupyter and all available on there. So you can see that in this zip package, which I will link to in the show notes. So what are my main points when I looked at the data? One, how anyone feels about this doesn't matter to how you feel. So I still go back to the core assessment. Does this really matter? Probably not. And the reason why is you get to decide how you feel about Wizards of the Coast. You get to decide how you feel about D&D. Those feelings that you have are independent from everybody else's. It doesn't matter how anybody else feels. And because everybody feels one way or another doesn't really change much. It matters a lot to Wizards of the Coast. It doesn't matter to you. You have tons of freedom to decide what you want to do for your game. You get to decide what material to bring in. You get to decide what to buy. You get to decide all that stuff. So how you decide whether or not you're a huge fan of D&D and you're wearing the D&D Converse Converse sneakers, or whether you hate it and you just want to do nothing but play the game Cairn or Lasers and Feelings, it doesn't matter, right? Like that's what's wonderful about this hobby, is that as long as you can get 1 to 6 other players together to play the game you want, it really doesn't matter what anyone else in the world is doing. And I think that's a huge value that this hobby has over pretty much every other hobby that we typically talk about these days. So they don't matter for you. They don't matter about your love of D&D and RPGs, and they don't matter about the games that you run for your players. I think that is still true. These a big qualifier, of course, because you go, oh God, who cares what these results are? They're not representative of the total. Yeah, they're not. These results are not representative of the entire group of people playing D&D. And guess what? No one has that. No one can get that. There's always this discussion about, well, what about the silent minority that doesn't go to YouTube, doesn't have a cell phone, lives in a cave, eats nothing but fish. It's like it's Tom Hanks in Castaway with his copy of Iron Sworn that went up on shore. That most players are like that. I don't actually think that's true, but we'll get to that in a second. But we recognize that this poll is a limited poll. It doesn't matter that there are 9,000 results. What matters is that the sample is not representative of the total. We know that, but guess what? None of them are. Wizards of the Coast isn't either. Nobody has that data. There's a general discussion about like what the average player is, though. And a lot of people will throw away the term, the average player is X, Y, or Z. I don't think there is an average player. I think there are many different average players coming in from lots of different areas, lots of different demographics, lots of ways they got into the hobby. I had a coworker that I was talking to, and we were talking, she's a huge Baldur's Gate 3 fan, so we were talking about Baldur's Gate 3, and I asked her if she plays RPGs, so she says yes, she plays the game Good Society, which is the Jane Austen RPG. And she has only ever played Good Society. It is the only game she played. So by my sample size, everybody that gets started in RPG starts with Good Society, and then you have to convince them to play D&D. Obviously, that's not true either. My point is there are so many different places that people get into this hobby, so many ways they play. Do they come in from streaming? Do they come in because they saw Stranger Things? Have they been playing for 30 years, then stopped and then came back? We don't know. So there is no hobby. This is what we refer to as a multimodal situation. There is no median. There is no center. There are instead many different centers. There are many different groups of spikes about ages and demographics and experience with the games and other hobbies and ways that they got in. I don't think it is useful at all to talk about the average. And I specifically don't think it's useful to talk about the average because there isn't one, and you certainly don't know who it is. I don't know who it is. Who do I know? I know you. Hopefully, I know a little bit about you. I know you're listening to me, right? So I know that, for example, when I put the Bob World Builder survey up on my site, and the people that answered are probably pretty representative of the people who are watching my show. Same with Bob, same with Professor Dungeon Master. And I actually split the results up among the three of us, which I'll get to in a minute. Leave a comment. I understand about representative samples. I understand about bad sample surveys. I get it, right? So that's not what we're saying. So throughout, you will hear me refer to respondents said. I'm not going to say that the community thinks. I'm not going to say this is what everybody thinks. These are the answers of the respondents. So generally speaking, what are the results? Respondents think generally positively about D&D and negatively about Wizards of the Coast. Not a huge surprise. Here's a Mike Shea data rule, right? Data results are almost always boring. If you find something really interesting in the data, you're probably wrong. You probably screwed up your analysis, or there's something else going on. If you find something really exciting, the likelihood is you're wrong. If you find boring things, it's probably more likely to be accurate. And that's the example. I don't think it would be any big surprise to hear people love D&D and don't really love Wizards of the Coast. The one thing I will say is people were a lot more negative about Wizards of the Coast respondents of this poll were a lot more negative about Wizards of the Coast than I thought they would be. I figured most people would be generally neutral. I thought it would lean towards negative, but I thought it would generally be neutral. Turns out people were way more negative about Wizards of the Coast. Respondents were way more negative about Wizards of the Coast than I thought they would be. And I think is that representative of everybody? No, but I think it's a problem. It's certainly representative of a group of people, probably a group of people who watch my show, who watch Bob World Builder's show, who watch Professor Dungeon Master show. I mean, do you care about them? I think so, right? And I think it would be a problem. So to me, I think that Wizards has an image problem. And that's something that they have to consider. It's not my problem, luckily. It's not a problem with the TTRPG hobby overall, so that's their issue. But I think they've got it. I think it's pretty clear that they've got it. As a little side data thing, so my wife and I run our little Sly Flourish empire here, and she handles Facebook side of it. So she's posting articles on Facebook, she's posting images over on Facebook and everything like that. And she watches what Wizards of the Coast publishes on Facebook. And she goes, every time they post anything, people immediately respond with Pinkerton's AI art OGL. And Christmas firings. But every time they post anything, hey, we have a new Vecna book. All the comments are Pinkertons, OGL, AI art, and firings. And I think 3 of those 4 don't really matter, right? And one they really worked hard to fix. So the fact that they're just getting beaten in the face with a mallet every time, and that's Facebook, right? But the same is true on Twitter. I think the same is true in a lot of places. They have an image. I think they have an image problem. Most respondents, this one I think was kind of a big deal, and is a little worrisome, but we'll see. Hopefully everybody's wrong. They're not positive about the future direction of D&D. That respondents were generally not positive about the future direction of D&D. And again, it's respondents that watch my show and Bob's show and Professor Dungeon Master's show. It's not everybody, but I bet you, I think probably, what could you assume? Well, people who aren't really paying attention to the zeitgeist probably don't even know there is a new edition, maybe. There is no average player. But I think the people that do are wondering, like, why are we doing this? So that could be an issue. It could be an issue in a lot of ways. And again, I don't think it's an issue with whether or not it will be good or not. Whether it's good or not is really up to the developers of the game. So we'll see what they do with it. But I'm talking particularly about the 2024, 2025 new core books that are coming out. The other one where I was wrong is I felt like more people were going to think that Wizards of the Coast's reputation was bad when their actual votes on it were going to be relatively neutral. And it turned out I was wrong. People felt like their reputation was bad, and their reputation actually was bad, according to the respondents of this poll. So, change people, respondents. We're accurate about other respondents' feelings. Right? This is a weird thing. So basically they asked two questions. They asked, how do you feel about Wizards of the Coast? And then how do you feel about the popularity of Wizards of the Coast? Is it going up, neutral, or down? And I thought more people would say that the popularity has gone down, but they themselves would be generally neutral. I was wrong. They were down and it was down. So that was one where I got into it. This Notion notebook that I have has kind of my information in it, is going to be linked in the show notes if you want to see it. But I'm going to skip down because, again, how much does it really matter? And I thought it would be fun to show like my own predictions, where things were and my own predictions. Now, I chewed the data up a little bit on this and generally broke it down to positive, neutral, and negative. I got rid of the one about how often you recommend it, because you can see it. It's in here, but I don't want to talk about it. I didn't think it was that interesting. And I didn't talk about like how often people watch streaming stuff. That's also in here. I wasn't really that interested. Instead, I was curious about D&D feelings, popularity, direction, Wizards feelings, popularity, and direction. And I broke it down to positive, whether or not they loved it or liked it, neutral, or then disliked it or hated it. And I grouped those together into positive, neutral, and negative, so you can see these results. So how did people feel about D&D? Positive, people feel positive. 75% were positive. I said it was 80%. So the parentheses are what I said. The actual was the actual is the first number. So I was pretty close. I was a little bit optimistic, but I think within 5%, you're doing pretty well. Neutral is 15%. I said 10. That was pretty accurate. Negative is I said 10, and it was actually 10. So I feel like I had a pretty good gauge of the respondents, how positive they felt about D&D. This one is interesting. D&D popularity. How popular do you think D&D is? Positive, neutral, or negative? Positive, 26%. I said 20%. I was negative. Neutral, 41%. I said 50%. Negative, 33%. I said 30. So I think with again, I'm pretty close. What's interesting about this one, this is sort of that like wisdom of the crowds, that if you ask lots and lots of people a question, you're going to get more accurate results than you ask a few pundits about what their answers are. And I think what we can take from the popularity is maybe it's up, maybe it's down, maybe it's neutral, and probably more likely it's neutral. I think that's about right. Like, I think that's a pretty safe bet that it's, maybe up a little bit, maybe down a bit, or maybe in the neutral. But I think what we're really talking about is kind of prediction here. Like, what do we predict the popularity of D&D is? D&D direction. So this one I was way off. Positive was 11%. I said 30%. I expected basically 30, 30, and 40. I thought that people would be generally more negative. It turns out I was off by more than 20%. So I thought more people would be positive about it than they are. 11% are positive. I said 30. Neutral, I was pretty close with 26 and 30, but negative is 63% as negative. I think this is pretty bad, because I think if you think about the kind of people who watch Bob World Builder and watch Professor Dungeon Master and watch me, that, we're generally like D&D, and the fact that we're looking at the future direction and we're not happy with it, I think that's pretty significant. So now Wizards of the Coast, definitely not worse. So I really said, how do people feel about Wizards of the Coast? I said 20, 40, and 40. So I said probably 20% are positive, 40% are neutral, 40% are negative. I was way off. 3% positive, 19% neutral, and 79%, almost 80% negative. Of the respondents to the survey, people were much more negative about Wizards of the Coast than I believed they were going to be. I was surprised by this. Maybe I was projecting. This is harking. I'm hypothesizing after the facts are known. Kids, don't do that at home. One possibility could be that I was applying my model to the wider range of the RPG community and not specifically to the audiences we have. And that's why I was overestimating like that. But I think it's pretty bad when you have 9,000 survey respondents, and how many people total does that represent? But that's a big group of people who generally have bad feelings of Wizards. That doesn't matter that we have bad feelings of Wizards. I don't think it really matters. Wizards popularity. So that was how we feel about it. Then popularity was we felt the overall popularity was. What I think is interesting about feelings and popularity is feelings is you and popularity is everybody else. And my thought was that we would not be accurate at that. Turns out we were very accurate. How WOTC popularity, positive 3%, exactly the same as Wizards feelings. Neutral 13%, so a little bit down. And then negative 84%, but that's within 5%. I think that is pretty accurate. So how people felt about it and how they thought the popularity was seemed to be perfectly in line. Wizards direction, this one really, wow. Right, I was off by 15 times. 150%. Yeah, it was way off. WOTC direction positive 1%. Right, I said 15%. I thought people would be more positive about the direction of Wizards of the Coast than they were. And still 50% is pretty low, but it was 1%. Neutral 9%. 89% doesn't feel like Wizards of the respondents feel like Wizards of the Coast is not going in the topic of direction. That's pretty bad. So. Timeline of the survey responses. This is when the polls came in. You can see clear spikes. This is your Bob World Builder spike right in the front. Your Professor Dungeon Master spike is the second one. And then my little spike right here. And those are correlated directly with the videos we put out. So I know that I'm highly confident that those spikes in the data are caused by us promoting the material on our various blogs. What that meant was I could take a slice of the data around that day and the next day and just look at that instead of looking at the whole. And then I created a nice little table here where we can compare how people felt among the three channels. This gives you an idea of the range. It gives you an idea of like how different the results can be among these three audiences, which also tells you how different the results could be overall, not specifically, but just that they could be vastly different. Examples about D&D feelings, total data was 75%, Bob's is 76, Professor Dungeon Master 68, me 83. Generally what you'll see across the line is when it comes to general positivity, the audience that I've got of 752 respondents that answered it the day of and the day after my video were like, on the order of 5 to 10% higher because I talk a lot about 5th edition. I talk a lot about D&D. And I think a lot of the people that watch the show actually do like D&D a lot. So the idea that Professor Dungeon Master is 68 and I'm 83, I'm not going to go over every one of these, but you can check it out. There's also the section on correlations. I'm not going to worry about the correlations. Were all pretty boring. People who felt positively about Wizards also felt positively about their direction. That's not a surprise. People who felt negatively about Wizards felt negatively about their direction. That's also not a surprise. People who felt negatively about WOTC felt bad about the direction of D&D. So those are these like correlations that you can see with these like bright spots. Bright blues and bright reds. They're all in the data if you want to do it. And if you're smarter than me with your data analytics, you can actually download the data and do it yourself. So I come back to those main points. One, this is fun. Right? It's kind of interesting to look at. It matters. I think Wizards of the Coast probably knows this. And, I think it matters a lot to them. When it comes to us in the hobby, I still go back to my main assessment, which is this really doesn't matter. What you see and hear in all these data don't matter to you and how you enjoy the game, what systems you want to play, what you enjoy with your friends at home, how you do it. I don't really think it matters that much. But I thought it was interesting to do. I enjoy data nerd stuff, so I was kind of happy to do it. But the end result is, however you feel about this is totally valid, whether you're on board or you're not on board, whether you agree with the general assessments of these or you do not. It's not a big deal. And I think it's far more interesting for us to dive into the actual games that we're running at our table. But I want to talk about it. Speaking of Bob World Builder, Bob has a new Kickstarter out for a book called Delve. Bob has partnered with Eventyr. I've worked with Eventyr before on other products of theirs as well. I've added little supplements to it. And you should know I am going to have a monster in this. So I am a biased entity when it comes to talking about this particular Kickstarter. It is a book. He is developing it both for 5e and for Shadowdark. And it is a book of material to help you run dungeons. So it's got lots of crunchy bits, monsters, traps, magic items, player options and stuff, and descriptions about how to run dungeons and how to do things like that. It looks really, really cool. I am developing a monster for this. I have a cool monster concept, and Bob and I have been going back and forth and talking about it. I think it is very interesting to do a joint product for both Shadowdark and 5e. If you back any version of it, you get the PDFs of both the Shadowdark and the 5e version. So whether you buy the physical book for 5e or the physical book for Shadowdark, you get both the Shadowdark and 5e versions in PDF. So that looks like a pretty good deal. And if you look at the price range for the 5e and Shadowdark version is about what you might expect for a single book these days. So that seems like a very reasonable way to go. It is interesting to see a book designed for both for both systems. And I'm eager to see the results, and I'm eager to see my own little part of this campaign. So that is the Delve Kickstarter by Bob World Builder, his first major book that he's released And he's done a bunch of different supplements and things like that. But this is like the first book that he's got into. I am excited to see it. I think it's going to be really cool. I think Even Tier makes outstanding products. I've seen the quality of their work before. So I think that's going to be really good. He's got a bunch of different community people that are involved in writing things for it. He's got other little bits, cards, and other little tchotchkes and doodads that you can add to it. It looks like Ginny D is getting involved. So check out Delve, the Kickstarter by Bob Worldbuilder, which is live on Kickstarter right now. Patrons of Sly Flourish get access to lots and lots of cool stuff. I talked about connecting with the Lazy GMs community over on our Sly Flourish Discord server. Obviously, you're helping me put on shows like this, but I want to show you an example of some of the stuff that you get for being a patron of Sly Flourish. And an example is one of a number of exclusive adventures you get. This one is called Regnum Rattus. This is actually the first Patreon adventure that I put up. Regnum Rattus, the Rats in the Cellar. This was an adventure built as a dare because I've heard people say, Rats in the Cellar is such a boring trope for D&D. I don't like it. And I was like, I really like Rats in the Cellar. I think it's really great. I'm going to write a whole adventure about it, and it'd be a really awesome adventure that you can run and actually take characters from 1st to 5th level doing the adventure. So it is a 10-page adventure. It's actually like a mini campaign. I don't know if it's like a mini campaign set. It's probably an adventure, but it's got a lot of different stuff on it. The idea is that you and the rest of the characters were brought to an old friend of yours who owns an inn. His son is sick. Or his wife is sick, his son is missing, he went down into the cellar beneath the inn, and there's all kinds of stuff that's going on, and he needs you guys. He can't do it anymore, but he needs you to go down into the cellar and help try to find a way to cure his wife's sickness and find his son. So there's a bunch of different quests that go on down there. There's like a bunch of secrets and clues about what's going on. And I have this really, really cool map that shows a side view of all of the different passageways and chambers and secrets that are going on here. Each chamber is kind of its own little mini adventure, and it's got a lot going on. It's a really fun adventure. Lots of cool stuff that you can do. And it's designed so that after you complete a certain number of quests, you level up so that you can actually take characters all the way from 1st level to at the end of the session, you'll be 5th level by the time you've finished Rat in the Cellars. So really fun. A lot of this adventure was based on the short story Graveyard Shift by Stephen King, which has this outstanding quote that I kind of use. The rat filled the whole gully at the far end of that noxious tomb. It was huge and pulsating gray, eyeless, totally without legs. A huge nameless thing whose progeny might someday develop wings. I thought that was really cool. So this is one example. There's actually a number of different adventures that you get for being a patron of Sly Flourish, but I wanted to show this one off. Patrons of Sly Flourish, the other part of it, which I talk about a fair bit, but I don't really dive into, is the freedom that I get by having patrons fund the work that I do. Lets me experiment with lots of different things that I might not otherwise be able to experiment with. It sort of gives me a budget that I can use to develop lots of things, both a budget in actual money, but also a budget in time, that it means I can experiment. And I always turn these experiments over to patrons, of course, but many of these experiments I release for everybody. And an example of that is releasing all of the tips from the D&D tip archive. So since 2009, I've been posting daily D&D tips to Twitter from 2009 to 2022. So what is that, 13 years? I posted tips over on, it was pretty much every day. I think I switched to 5 days a week for a little bit and then went back to 7 days a week. So there were 3,800 of them in there. And actually it was more than that. I think I put 3,800 here, but I think it's more like 5,000. Then I left Twitter and moved over to Mastodon, but I kept using the tips. And now I also include the tips in my newsletter. So the weekly newsletter you get by subscribing for the newsletter. You also get 7 recent tips from the games that I run. I wanted to release these to everybody. So before I had released it under a more limited Creative Commons non-commercial share-alike license, I have since decided to release them under a commercially available attribution license. So now all you have to do to use these in any way that you want is reference the work that I do. I have a little license here that references it, and you can get access to thousands of D&D tips that you can use for wall calendars. You can use for like business cards. You can, however you want to use it is great, as long as you reference the fact that these tips came from the stuff that I did. But it's really this having this freedom, having the support of patrons that give me the confidence to be able to say, yeah, I'm going to take this big thing that I have, this thing that I've been working on for 15 years, and say, yeah, I want that to be useful to everybody. I did it with the Lazy GM resource document as well. That's in the Creative Commons. The original Lazy Dungeon Master is in the Creative Commons. Lots of different things that I've released in the Creative Commons, and people are starting to use and build things out of them. And I'm very happy. And one of the reasons I can do that is that I'm getting the ongoing support from Patreon to be able to do that. So patrons, thank you so much for giving me the ability and the freedom to do that kind of thing. If you want to help out, becoming a patron of Sly Flourish is the best way. But if you want to use this stuff, it is available. You can find it in the show notes and you can use it yourself. I got a new preview of a product. I think Raging Swan had published this before, but I think has a new version and a new update available. And that is the GM's Miscellany Wilderness Dressings. I've looked at dungeon dressings before. I've talked a lot about Raging Swan products. I really, really love Raging Swan products. They are excellent, very usable, table usable, and affordable products that you can use for your TTRPGs, focusing on lots and lots of different random stuff that exists there. And the GM's Miscellany Wilderness Dressings, I did receive a preview copy of this from Raging Swan to take a look at. And after giving it a good look, I highly recommend it. So what do you get with this? You get a whole bunch of different random tables that are more than just, hey, here's some monsters that might show up, for a bunch of different regions, but also a bunch of different situations that are going on. And examples of situations are like who might be some travelers that you run into. What is some extreme weather that you might run into? So not just physical locations, but also potential situations. Bandits. What's a big list of bandits? So it has this kind of broken out way of location-focused stuff, but also a few things that are location-independent that you can drop in. And then for each of these, a list of pretty deep random tables that give you access to things that you can drop in. So an example here is we'll just jump straight to the Badlands. The Badlands are your bad, dry, desert-like area with minor events. What are some things that might be happening? You could just grab some of these. You could roll a few D100s and say, yeah, there's dark shadows moving in the dim recesses of a low cave mouth, or the sun glints off something reflective halfway up a queerly shaped cliff. So you get, and there's 100 of these just for that. There's minor dressing. So those are like minor events, things that happen, right? A flash of light attracts the character's attention to a rusting shield, partly buried in grit and dust. But then you have dressings, like, what are some things that are just lying about? The wind, siphoned through innumerable canyons and gullies, winds through the Badlands. A dry course of wide and once powerful river cuts through the Badlands. Its banks are shallow and easy to traverse. I think this stuff works really well during prep. I think that when you're prepping an area, particularly if you're doing travel, you could decide where the travel is going on and just jot some of these things down. Roll through them, skim through it, pick a couple out, and put them as bullets next to your area to make the whole area feel a little bit more alive. I think it's probably a little clunky to roll on these during your game because they're small enough that you'd want to roll one or two. You might not even like or find the first one contextually relevant, so you'd want to roll again. And I think that could slow things down. So I think you're really better off rolling on this during your prep and then jotting down a couple of the ones that you really like, and then using those when you're actually running your game. That's how I would use it. What's really cool about this is it sits very well side by side with your books of actual random encounters. So my current favorite book of random encounters and random situations is the Trials and Treasure book by Level Up Advanced 5e. I'm just loving Level Up Advanced 5e, so it's just an outstanding product, an outstanding set of products from top to bottom. I haven't really tried the Adventurer's Guide much, but we're going to be doing a campaign pretty soon. I think next week. Week after next, we're going to be starting on our A5e City of Arches campaign. And we're going to try it out. And I don't know what it looks like on the player side, but I can tell you on the GM side, it's fantastic. And on the GM side, it is completely usable in any of your 5e games. And the Trials and Treasure book is really, really good for that. It has lots of different locations, lots of different potential encounters, weather and things like that. But it doesn't have this kind of detail in it, nor does this book really overlap on the stuff it has compared to what Trials and Treasure has. Which means this book side by side with Trials and Treasure is a really good set of material to help you run exploration of overland places. So check out the GM's Miscellany Wilderness Dressings product. I think you're really going to like it. I really dig it. So here is a topic that I've been chewing on for a while. Back on Mastering Dungeons, an excellent podcast done by my friends Sean Merwin and Teos Abadia, they talked with Graham Ward. I think it was Teos was talking with Graham Ward. And there was this question of what it means for Wizards of the Coast to be good stewards of the hobby or not. And Graham turned that topic around and instead said, what do we need to be good stewards? Now, they've said specifically being good stewards of D&D, but I'm going to expand that out to what does it mean to be a good steward for TTRPGs? And I think that's a really fascinating topic. I thought that their conversation on the show, which I've linked in the show notes, is a really outstanding topic. But it got me really thinking about it. It got me talking about it on the Sly Flourish Discord server. And I think it's a really interesting topic of like what it means for us to be good stewards. Now, one big question is, do you need to be a good steward? Is it your responsibility? Probably not. Like, you can just enjoy the game. You don't have to be the one evangelizing the game to everybody else. You don't have to be the one like expanding it to the world. But I think a lot of us feel that way, right? A lot of us who really love this game want other people to really love this game too. And so we can kind of take that charge. We can say, yeah, I want to be a good steward for the hobby. I want to help people bring them in. I certainly have taken this on board. I certainly want to help people of all types run great games. That is the core mission of Sly Flourish, is help GMs run great games. That's the one thing I want to do more than anything else, is help GMs run great games. But what does that like specifically mean, and how do we go about that? So I've been working on an article for Sly Flourish. I wanted to talk about it here, get the ideas out here, and I'm going to publish it on Sly Flourish as well, but I wanted to kind of pick that up. And I think there's really one main thing that we can do to be good stewards of the hobby. The one thing that I think we don't always do, that I think really matters, and that is embracing the diversity of the hobby and revealing the diversity of the hobby. And that diversity is in lots of different ways. It is certainly in the people who play it, the range of different people who play it, the people who it reaches out to who get to express themselves in this game of all different walks of life, all different kinds of people, and how it gives them this comfortable place to be with their friends, to enjoy creative fiction and a few laughs and a few good times around the table. It is that is hugely important. But it's not just the diversity of the people, it's also the diversity of the games that we play, the range of the games that we play. Again, everything. I like to bring up lasers and feelings because it's like a one-page RPG where you roll one die and you have one skill, lasers and feelings, and or two skills, and your number goes between the two. Right? That we can play so many different kinds of games. And it's wonderful to see the wide range of games that we can play. Everything from like big budget games like D&D and IP focused games like Aliens and Blade Runner, and all range of different fantasy RPGs, and just this huge plethora. And so one thing that often gets in the way of people being good stewards is gatekeeping in a couple different ways. Both gatekeeping in who we allow into the hobby. You're not a real gamer, or your game, that's not real RPG, or you're playing that game wrong, or you're not hanging on to the core principles of the way the game was meant to be. And a lot of times it's, and I don't like you, and I don't want you to be playing the game that I enjoy. But the other one is like, oh yeah, that this is the best game. That game is terrible, and this game is good. I see it constantly all over the web of like every time anybody wants to talk about an RPG, people have to go on there and talk about why that RPG sucks, and they should instead be playing RPG Y. I'm not going to name them, but you can imagine there are two at the top that are always arguing about one another. So let go of that, right? I've talked about this before. There is no right answer in this hobby. There is no one way to do things. There is no perfect RPG. Instead, there are many right answers, and we each get to decide what the right answer is for us. And I think the more wide open we consider that, the more we recognize that other people can love games that we don't, the better off we are, and the better we are being good stewards of the hobby. So I think number one is embracing the diversity of the hobby, recognizing it, and recognizing that the experiences that new people have are just as valid and just as important to the hobby as old-timer experience. The fact that I've been playing for decades doesn't matter compared to the people who have only been playing a few months. Their experiences are just as valid, and in many cases, the experiences that they have are unique to me. I have not heard those before. I have not seen those before. I can learn as much from people who are just starting off with this hobby as they can learn from me having played it for decades. That doesn't matter. We are not on different planes. We're not in different tiers. My longevity does not matter to helping people run great games. I think that hanging on to that diversity, hanging on to that just all the different people and how they got into it and why they got into it, that really matters. So being a little bit more specific about ways that we can be good stewards of the hobby. One is obviously welcoming new members. Right? Show them how awesome the game is. Show them that it's important. Talk about the idea of like the real joy of this game is being able to get together with your friends regularly, whether you're all adults and professionals and have other aspects of your life, and be able to share in these tales of high fantasy, these tales of high adventure, and laugh and have a good time. And do so in a cooperative manner, right? We're not competing with anybody. We're not beating them at cards. We are all sharing in an awesome story. Focus on that and focus on showing them that stuff. Get to the fun fast. Do whatever you can to break down the barriers so that when you're actually running the game or teaching the game, you get them into the game as fast as you can. That might be picking a simpler system so that you can just get them started, but it could also mean like grab the starter set and run. Teach what people want to learn. A lot of times people have come in from a particular angle. That angle might not have been the angle that you came into the hobby, but they want to learn a thing. So don't immediately try to convince them that the thing they wanted to learn is wrong, and instead teach them the thing they want to learn. A lot of people are going to want to come in and learn D&D. So don't immediately say, oh, D&D is terrible. You should instead play this thing, right? Just show them D&D. Let them enjoy. Don't steer them away from the thing that brought them into the hobby in the first place. Show them the breadth of the hobby. It is totally cool to talk about other games, talk about other systems, talk about other publishers. Show them how wide it is. Show them how much stuff they can get. Expose them to the massive amounts of other publishers that are publishing stuff, because that's what makes this hobby really strong. If they're bound into just D&D and they don't recognize all of that other stuff, they're dependent upon whatever Wizards of the Coast decides to do with D&D. But there's a lot of stuff out there that they can play. I have a friend who on his own started off by GMing D&D, and now he's playing Dragonbane. I've never even seen Dragonbane before. I've never actually played it. I think I heard about it, but then he was like, oh no, it's really cool. And it looks like a really cool RPG that I should check out. So I think that's great that he's like, yeah, we're going to try other RPGs. Fantastic. Focus on what matters. Show people how these games bring us together, have fun with each other, and have a good creative time with our friends. Always be focusing on that. And keep, as Roland Deschain from the Gunslinger series would say, eyes open, mouth shut, see much, say little. Learn from the people that you're talking to. When you're evangelizing, don't be the only one talking. Ask them about their experiences. Ask them about how they got in. Ask them about what they know about it. Ask them questions. Learn from them. Really recognize the fact that they are not total noobs and you're totally experienced. They have their whole life brought them to that moment. Learn about that life. Learn about what brought them there. Learn about how they got there. And don't immediately shut them down. There's a weird human reaction to try to dominate over their experiences, to try to, show them how much more experienced you are and try to tell them the right way to do things. Resist that. Listen to them and then show them what they can do. What are things we can avoid? Gatekeeping. Don't gatekeep the hobby. Don't tell them that the way they're trying to enjoy the hobby is wrong. Don't tell them that, the way they got into the hobby is wrong. Oh, great, you're one of those Critical Role people. Oh, you don't have any idea what these RPGs are like. That's terrible, right? If somebody is like, look, my game night is watching Dimension 20, and then on weekends I play Good Society with my friends, the Jane Austen RPG. That's not the wrong way to play the hobby. That is a totally good and valid way to play the hobby. It is as valid as your way. Any way that somebody is playing their RPG is as valid as your way is, right? You don't have some special hold on the hobby that other people don't have. Everybody gets to enjoy this hobby however you want. So don't gatekeep. Don't bash other games. Don't constantly go and tear other games down. I really feel like I've made this statement before. I don't think there are bad games that we've heard of. So I really think that any game that we have heard about means somebody loves it. Right? The only games that really, truly suck are the ones that nobody has ever paid any attention to. Even the owners of the games aren't doing anything with it. If we have heard about the game, it's likely a good game to somebody. Now, I'm also not talking about games that are actively destructive to people. Games that are really have decided to go in a bad way. There are some that I would refer to as a bad game, just from the ideology that they decide to promote. But again, we get to decide that on our own. But from like a mechanic standpoint, from an understanding of the game standpoint, if we've heard about it, somebody loves it. And that means it's probably a valid game. Avoid the alienating jargon. We're all terrible about this. I use alienating jargon, but just remember, people don't understand these acronyms. They don't understand the games. They don't understand version numbers. They don't understand this stuff. Nobody knows what that OGL, the OGL SRD means. OGL SRD 1 point whatever. Nobody knows, right? So try to avoid the jargon. Try to focus on what it's like to learn about this game, never having learned it from before. Catch yourself on the acronyms. Don't use it to alienate people by using your fancy language. Don't brag. Don't talk about how long you've been playing RPGs. Hold it back. I know you want to talk about how long it's been. Don't. Listen. Listen to them first. Don't tell them about your experience with the game. Hear about their experience with the game and support them in what they want to do with it. Don't promote a single right way. Remember that they get to enjoy the game. They want to enjoy it the same way that you do it. And all of this comes down to like having an open mind with it, right? That RPGs is this awesome hobby. We all love it. I love it. And I think you wouldn't be sitting around here listening to all this if you didn't love it too. And there's so much that we can learn from other people. There's so much that we can learn from other systems. Keeping our mind open, letting all that material in here, learning from everybody, I think is a really big part of being a good steward. Learn as much from the people that you're talking to as you try to teach them about how awesome this hobby is. Every month on the Sly Flourish Patreon, I post a monthly Q&A. This is an opportunity for patrons of Sly Flourish to be able to ask me any TTRPG related question. I go through all the questions that I get every Friday and answer them. I get my coffee, I sit there, I enjoy a nice time answering these questions. Some of them make their way onto the show here. Other ones become the catalyst for other articles or videos that I do in the future. Lesseron N says, I'm new to RPGs, D&D, and DMing. Welcome to the hobby. So first of all, thank you for coming, and thank you for your support. Without your book, I would not have known what to prep for a session. We just finished the 10th session of our first campaign, 2/3, and I'm looking for a new setting. I discovered Fateforged, an RPG based on 5e that has a whole world setting and also exists in French, which is a big plus. The books are beautiful, but we are just beginning to understand the D&D 5e rules, and I'm not sure that it's a good idea to change rules. If you know these books, what do you think of them? Are the rules very different from 5e, and would you recommend them to a group of beginners? I have taken a look at Fateforged. I did a spotlight on Fateforged particularly. But I think this is a really good example of, sure, give it a shot. I don't think you'll break people. I don't think that by trying to play a new system, you're going to break their abilities to understand other systems in the future. I can't say that Fateforged is a perfect system and that nothing that it did in there is contrary to standard 5e principles. But I would not worry about it. If Fateforged works for you, absolutely you should embrace it. One of the cool things that Fateforged does is Fateforged actually has like a whole different way to wrap the campaign world around the style of game that you want to play. Do you want it to be super gritty and dark? Do you want it to be crazy high fantasy? I think it had like 5 different ways that you could sort of thematically change the entire game. And I thought that was a really interesting way of designing their game world and designing the supplements. From my look at the material, it looked outstanding. So I would, especially if it's useful to you because it's in French, I would definitely take a look at Fateforged. I would not be too worried about it, and you'll be fine. You're going to learn a lot. All of the games are flawed. No game is perfect. We're always going to have to deal with it and deal with kind of things that we run into, but I would not shy away from taking a look at Fateforged at all. Steve B says, I'm reading through the Midgard World Book and wow, is it impressive in breadth and depth. What are ways to convey this level of detail in lore and history to players? I feel like if I could dispense a full 10 secrets and clues every session, it wouldn't be enough, especially given players seem to retain a fraction of that. At a more general level, how do you make the best use of a world book? It's been a great resource of inspiration and lore, but maybe there are other creative uses. Really good question. Midgard is huge. I was actually going through like my collection of Midgard books saying like, which are the Midgard books that really tell me about the whole world? And there's like 9 of them. So not only is the Midgard World Book like a 600-page tome of information about Midgard, but you have the Clockwork City, the Zobek Clockwork City source book. You have Empire of the Ghouls, which covers a lot of material for the world. You have the Southlands book. You have the City of Cats. You have a lot of articles that were written in the various Warlock zines. There's so much material. Book of Ebb and Tides, Tales of the Old Margrave, tons of material that you can get to fill this out. So how do you use it all? Well, one thing is like not letting yourself get too intimidated by it and just absorbing what you're able to absorb. But when you talk about conveying that level of detail to the players, you're spot on, which is the 10 secrets and clues. Recall that they don't need to get all of the lore of the whole world all at once. They only need the area that's around them for the thing that they're doing right now. So instead of telling them about all of the gods, just focus on the gods of the region that are there and maybe only pick 2 or 3. 3. So if you're in the center of the world, the crossroads region of Midgard, you could just focus on those crossroad guards and just pick 2 or 3. Pick Rava and Volund and a couple, 1 or 2 of the others that you think are going to matter to the characters. Put the characters in the center of your mind, draw a circle around them, and think about what's inside that circle. And that is both physically, that is theologically, that is, with the history, all of those areas. You only need to focus on the things that really are currently surrounding your characters. And then as they're exploring the world, you get to expand it out a little bit more and in the direction that they're going. So I think you can start by saying, what region are you playing in? Focus on the region, focus on the secrets that matter to that region. They don't really care about what's going on in the Dragon Empire off to the east when they're sitting here in the crossroads. They really only care about what's going on in the crossroads and what's happening there. So sometimes it's hard for us to keep ourselves bounded like that. Like, wow, we have the Southlands book and we have the City of Cats. Shouldn't we be focusing on that? You don't really have to focus on all that stuff until it comes out. One thing I've really loved about running Empire of the Ghouls is that it was sort of like an travel almanac of the entire middle region from top to bottom of Midgard, including going down deep. And for 2 years, myself and my players got to explore Midgard, learn new things, try new things, learn about different gods, learn about the masks, learn about all of this stuff, and do so by going through the various regions of the world. So we didn't have to do it all at once. Instead, we got to focus on it. The only issue is there's so much material available for Midgard. It's not quite Forgotten Realms big, but it's pretty big. And, it means that you might have to pick up more products if you really want to dive in. Like if you go to the Southlands or if you go to the City of Cats, it's really useful to have those books. If you go to the Margrave Forest, you can go pick up Tales of the Old Margrave. There's lots of different things that you can pick up to kind of support your game. But I think that's what makes Midgard fun. And it means that we now have this world that we have in our possession that we can use for games in the future, just like Eberron and like these other systems. And the more we learn about them, the more we can use those to expand upon our own game. So I think it's really good. So let yourself enjoy it as you enjoy it. Don't worry too much about trying to absorb it all. Big thing is focusing around the characters as the center focal point of your information, and then saying what's around them and what are those pieces of information that I can give them. Cowfunk says, I am running Wild Beyond the Witchlight with my group, and it's been going really well. My players are leaning into the creativity of attempting to avoid combat where possible while also finding a few fights to get into along the way. I'm filling in some space with helpful expansions from the DM Guild. We are in Hither. In the last session, we began a second Harangon brigand encounter. They met Agdon, who attempted to steal their stuff while running circles. 2 boats full of brigands also engaged. You may recall there's a quick way out by grabbing the scarf, but my barbarian tried that once and failed. We ended the last session with the barbarian going unconscious under Agdon's assault, the moon druid direwolf form wearing down, and I'm not sure my party will make it through the encounter without all being knocked out. So I need to go in prepped for whether or not they make it through and scare the brigands off or the brigands win. If my whole party becomes unconscious, I'm faced do I leave them in the swamp or do I send them to Bravlona's cages as written? There's also the option of placing them in the Haragon's hideout in the stump. Do I take their stuff? All of it? How hard should it be to get it back? These are thieves, after all. It's a really good point. So one thing is you're in a good spot because you didn't force the issue. There are definitely times where GMs are like, I want them to be captured by the brigands because that's the way the story goes. And I know that isn't necessarily how it goes in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, but somebody might have that idea. You didn't force it to go that way, which means that the situation is driving the direction that it goes. And it's also good that you're thinking about, okay, they might survive it and everything will be fine. They might not. What do I do? That's actually a really good thing to do. I had a battle recently where I was pretty sure the characters are going to survive because I didn't think about what happens if they lose here. And they almost did. We had 4 of 7 characters knocked out, 4 14th level characters out of 7 knocked out in 1 round. And I was like, oh my God, they're going to TPK. They pulled it out, but it was really hard. So I think it's a good idea to have like, well, hey, what happens if I do this? The situation you bring up of what happens if they are all knocked unconscious, what do I do with that? There's 2 vectors that you can think about this problem. Vector number 1 is what makes sense for the situation. What are the brigands likely to do? And then 2 is what's fun for the game. And these 2 things work together. I like to think that you start first by saying what the situation is as one dial, and then make sure the fun dial is involved so that because if the situation is just lame, it's no good. Like, even though it's what would happen most, like they would probably take all of the gear of all of the characters and hide it somewhere far away so that the characters can't easily get it. That makes sense. it's also really lame and boring. And players hate it when they lose their stuff, and they don't want to be like that for long. So I would definitely have it where almost like in Return of the King, where the orcs are going through Frodo and Sam's gear, and it's just one level away. I think it would make sense that they wouldn't have their stuff. I think you could definitely have it where Agdon and the other guys have brought them to the stump rather than brought them to the cottage, but they might have brought them to Bavlor in his cages. I would probably have their stuff nearby, and I would not make it very long for them to get that stuff, because, and you might even tell them, like, don't worry about removing it from your sheet or anything like that, right? Like, you might tell them, because it just kind of sucks. It just, like, because they'll spend a lot of time just getting to where they were. And that's something that's really demotivating. It is a huge downward beat for the characters to feel like they lost ground and now they're just getting back to where they were, and it's taking hours of time, like hours of real life time, for them to figure that out. So you might even have them kind of come conscious while they're on the boats on their way back, and maybe they can do something else then. You could have them go into the stump and they can see that people are rifling through their gear and laughing at them and stuff, but maybe like half of the group is far away, and maybe somebody's able to kind of get through the cages. Give them options for how they can get out, but I would get them back to their stuff pretty much as soon as possible, because players just hate it. Like, it's really a downward beat when people lose their gear and then have to go through a lot of work to get the stuff they already had. And they're like, if we had just not done that, we'd have been better off. So that's definitely something to consider. I think it's really great that you're considering this. It's a really good question to ask. Hell, for all I know, by this point, you've already figured out what the ending was. So I'd like to hear it. But generally speaking, it seems like a good idea. There's common things that GMs do players hate. And one is, don't force characters getting captured. It's just terrible. Don't set up an encounter where there's 5-6 times more monsters than there ought to be just to knock them out and capture them. The players smell that a mile away. They feel cheated. They just want to walk away. They're just like, this sucks, right? I've had it happen to me as a player. I've probably done it as a GM. It just sucks. Instead, if you really want players to get captured, if you have to have it, you can do it the way that Out of the Abyss does it, and have them captured at the beginning so that they didn't actually lose anything because they never had anything in the first place. That's not so bad if you have to do it. If they do get captured because circumstances resulted in that, that's one thing. But remember that every minute that the players are feeling like they're behind is a negative minute, right? Every time they feel like they haven't been at least where they were, that it feels bad to them. So you probably want them to get back to even pretty quickly, and ideally even get back to the top. So that's what I would recommend. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in TTRPGs. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you like it and you want more stuff like this from me, the best thing you can do is subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You can find a link in the show notes. You get a weekly RPG-related email sent directly to your inbox, and you get a free adventure generator PDF. You can also support me directly on Patreon. Patrons get access to all that stuff I was talking about. They also help me put on the show. Thank you so much to patrons. And you pick up my books at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Link for that is also in the show notes, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the Lazy DM's Workbook, Lazy DM's Companion, Forge of Foes, the Fantastic Adventure books, and a lot more. Please check that out. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.